Hello everyone, and for those of us in North America, happy release day. Welcome to the Commando cast. I'm Andrew, and today on the release day of Spark of Hope, I want to look at 5 deck lists that I think will impact the early meta. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 36 of the Commando cast. So today is the North American release. For those of you in Europe, I'm not exactly sure what time your release date is. Hopefully it's, if not today, hopefully it's very soon, so you guys don't have to wait much. So what I just want to do today, similar to some other formats that I've done solo, is I just want to break it down. I want to look at 5 deck lists that I think are going to impact the early meta. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be everything, but remember, usually in the early meta, people are trying to try out their new toys. So most of these decks I expect to have or be centered around either new characters or very new cards. The 5th deck list, the last one we'll go through, you'll see is actually an old pairing, but I think will be significantly more exciting with some of the new cards that we've seen. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so the first deck list I want to go through is one that Mike and I have talked about already on several of our other episodes. I'm actually very excited about this one. This is the guy that I'm most excited to play, and it's Django! So, Django's Snoke Profitable Connection, right? It's just a 14 point, a 13 point, which allows you to play the Profitable Connection plat, which lets you start with an extra $1. So really the theory here is pretty solid. You're just going to load up Django and let him do the thing. You also want to focus on redeploys and some bigger weapons to also load up or make Snoke more of a threat so he can actually finish the game, because you're going to be Snoking Django when you're able to make the extra damage and hopefully hit your opponent. And then, of course, with the reprint of Armed to the Teeth, you're probably going to end up sacking Django at some point, or at least a lot of the upgrades on him to drop another character. Hopefully that's to finish the game out, but it may just be right before he dies. So again, you want to make sure that we have some redeploys. So we've got the list here. I'll just go through it top down. So we have Snoke for 13 points. We have Django for 14 points, both of them elite. We have Profitable Connections for 3 points. And then we're playing on Jabba's Palace. This is the new battlefield for bounty hunters. So going into upgrades, we have the reprint of armor plating, which is really just fantastic for Django. It's actually, if you look at the the old art on armor plating, it's actually Django's armor, right? So I'm actually gonna be busting out my old armor platings just to play with them just for some flavor. We then have 2 copies of Bounty Hunter Mask. That one's a no-brainer. We actually spoiled that on the Commando cast a couple episodes ago, so we're excited to play that in here. I do have 2 copies of the Donderbus pistol. I really like this pistol, not just because it has the pseudo ambush, but it pairs up pretty well. It's got the 1, the +2. It does have the indirect, and it also, of course, has the redeploy, which is very important. Now, it does have to be played on Django, but that's, I think, you're going to be loading up anyway, and then it'll move right over to Snoke. Then have 2 copies of the Gauntlet Rockets. Has to go on Django. I don't know why you wouldn't play it on him anyway. And then that can serve later for a 3-pointer. It can potentially get you the money back with Django's ability, but it can serve for an overwrite later with the Vibro Cutlass. So I then have 2 Mandalorian jetpacks. That one's, I'm going back and forth on that one. It's kind of cool, especially like if you're going up against like a Vader or something like that. But it is equipment. The Van Braces are just more equipment for Django. Then I have 2 copies of the Vibro Cutlass, so the hope is to get at least one of those, if not both of them, in play on Django before they die, so they move over to Snoke. I do realize that they're not free on Snoke, but hopefully for in-game it won't matter as much to be able to just, hit for roll in Snoke and be able to hit for, maybe 6 or 7, right? Even though you have to pay for it, it's okay. So for events, Armed to the Teeth is a no-brainer, right? You just want to try to chuck some of the worthless equipment on Django before he dies. 2 copies of Doubt, 1 copy of Entangle. It's a really good card, but it does have to spot yellow, so Django has to be alive. That's why I only have 1 of them. I have 2 copies of Forsaken. I'm actually not sure how often I'm going to be able to Forsaken, at least on my own side, because you're generally going to have a lot of dice in the pool with Django. So, but it can, trip up somebody else if they only have 1 die in the pool, and then it's always a good surprise. It's just a good card. 2 motives, no surprise there. 2 copies of Back to Therapy. It makes a lot of sense with Django because you're going to be putting a lot of stuff on him. For 2, you can just heal him up for probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5. I have 2 copies of Rendezvous. That allows you to resolve a yellow die with a pay side for free, right? That's in case of those Vibro Cutlasses that are on Snoke at the end, or maybe even the Django 2 money, whatever you need to do to ramp. And then have 1 copy of Desperate Measures. This card I think is going to be played in every yellow villain deck. I don't know why you wouldn't play at least one copy of this in every yellow villain deck. Then I have 2 copies of Undermine. Another card that I could see, so this is the list. Another card that I could see swapping out, perhaps for the Forsaken slot, is the card from this new set called Tantrum, which is discard an equipment or weapon that you own to remove a die. I could potentially see chucking, one of these. The Bounty Hunter Mask, I guess, gives you a health, but I could see in a pinch chucking one of your equipment or upgrades that you've already gotten the money off of just to remove the die. I think it's a possibility. So that's something to think about and perhaps in future testing. So that's the list I have for Django Snoke. Let me know what you think, what cards I'm missing, and that's it for this one. All right, the next deck I have features IG-88. Actually, this is a 2 new character pairing. A lot of people are very excited about IG-88, but I've seen a lot of proposals for the Snoke again, or even Jabba to try to get bounties. When I look at IG-88 and I actually look at his ability to kind of hit everybody with a bounty, it just really doesn't appeal to me. In this deck, I'm really just using IG-88 just straight up for his just gun sides. Like this deck very much, if you look at these 2 characters, you have a 1 gun, a 2 gun, a 2 indirect, then you have a 2 gun, a 2 gun, and a 3 for 1. This is just a straight aggro deck. There's really not a lot of eloquence about this deck. It's just loading up guns and going to town. So deck list here, we're starting with IG-88 for 17 points elite, Gideon Hask, 13 points for elite, and then on Jabba's Palace again, I like that battlefield for the Bounty Hunter. Upgrades, just guns, 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 and guns, right? So we have 2 A300s that has redeploy, Grievance Striker that has redeploy, 2 E5 blasters. While on a droid, it has redeploy, so you have to play it on IG-88, but then it redeploys. You may be noticing a theme with the guns here. We have 2 Donderbus blasters, pseudo activation and redeploy. Again, the theme continues. Then have 2 Riot Shields that would of course go on Gideon for maximum, and then armor plating can go on either. So all I'm doing here is just running. This is just a straight simple aggro deck. A bunch of guns, a bunch of stuff to soak up damage. For events, we're just running cheap stuff. Sinister Peace, Doubt, Fresh Supplies. I think this deck is going to be relatively fast. Automated Defense, you spot IG-88 to remove a die. We have 2 Rendezvous, just in case you're getting those 3 sides on IG-88. 2 Measure for Measures for Gideon's die. 2 Focused Fire. This is kind of like a mini Pulverize in this deck, right? It's a 1 cost to resolve 2 ranged against the same character, increasing their value by 1. It's not quite as backbreaking as a Pulverize can be, but it can certainly get the job done. And actually, in this deck, I think it's probably better than Pulverize. So that's why I'm running them, not only to mention it's a 1 cost. We have 2 of the best defense, help keep IG-88, which is a big beat stick, alive. 2 counterintelligence, just to thin their deck out before you roll in, or thin their hand out before you roll in. And then 1 copy of Desperate Measures, again, with my statement from the last deck that I don't know why you wouldn't be playing yellow, at least one of these in yellow villain. Even if you're only taking a 5 to get rid of a fist, it seems like a pretty good play. So again, there's not a lot of tricks to this guy. You're pretty much just going straight for the throat, loading up guns, rolling out, and blowing them away. All right, the third deck list I've actually been shooting some videos, playing around with. I played Symbio once, kind of with my proxy, because I had gotten Brinton had brought me a Maul promo back from Star Wars Celebration, so I kind of made some really janky proxy die and I'd rolled out a bit. So you can go back and look at those videos if you want. This is very similar to that deck list. It really hasn't changed much from what I had before. So let's get right into it, right? So we're playing the new Maul for 20. I'm playing the Veteran Stormtrooper for a 3-die start, so it is a 3-die start, but that does allow me to play Retribution. I'm also on Obi-Wan's Hut for now. Not completely sold on that. I could be flexible on that, but I just like Obi-Wan's Hut just for the free shield on Maul. You're pretty fast in this deck, believe it or not. For upgrades, I have Nevan Mastery, 2 copies. I know you can only have 1 in play, but I want it that bad. I have 2 copies of Neman Training. I have 2 copies of Maul's Lightsaber. I have 2 copies of Dooku's Lightsaber. Remember, Dooku's is not only a 2 cost, but when you play it, you can ping for 1 if somebody doesn't have a shield. 2 of the recovered Sith Lightsaber to take away a shield. Do note that you can recovered Sith and then overwrite for the Dooku. It's a lot of work for 1 ping damage, but it does work. And I have 2 copies of Dark Council. As I talked about in a previous episode, Symbio kind of reminded me of the light on Dark Council and how well it works on the big beat stick characters. For events, I have 2 copies of Forsaken. It's fantastic in this deck because you have the single die Stormtrooper. 2 Hidden Motives, 2 Sinister Peace, 2 Measure for Measures. You'll notice those are all 0 cost removals. You're just putting your money into getting upgrades on Maul, rolling them out, and killing people. 2 copies of Conflicted. Conflicted is amazing on Maul. 2 copies of the Best Defense, just to keep Maul alive. 2 copies of Doubt. And then I have 2 copies of Legacies. So this is the card. We don't see this card a lot, right? But just a reminder, so Legacies allows you to resolve the modifiers if it was not. A lot of times you're going to, especially like on the Maul Saber, you'll get Maul Saber stuck out there if you've already Maul power actioned, or even if you're using it for the Maul power action and it doesn't hit, you can re-roll in and try to just resolve it with Legacies for a little surprise. Because a lot of times people won't remove that because it's a modifier side, right? So you can just kind of surprise them and hit right into it. So this one's, again, I don't think there's a lot of tricks in this deck. It's pretty straightforward. I can't wait to Neiman Mastery a special into a Maul 3 with like a Maul Saber 4. Like I just can't wait. So I like this deck a lot. The Maul power action really is pretty cool. On the rare times that he does miss, it doesn't feel bad to just power action it. And then if you miss again, you can pitch to reroll and still do it. Maul's a lot of fun. I don't know if he's going to ultimately be all that good. I do expect to see this deck running around a lot in the early meta, people trying out Maul. So I think this is going to be something very similar to what you're seeing. I have heard that there's a Mandalorian Commando version out there as well. I personally think that just with the 0 cost removal options, I think that you want to run the vet. That 3 side also feels really good, but I don't know. We'll see. So let me know what you think. If you've been trying a different pairing with him. I could see an argument for like the Executioner and maybe a 2 cost plot. I don't know what that would be, but I don't know. It's got a lot of possibilities, and I think we're going to see Maul in the early meta. All right, the 4th deck I want to go into, and this is a disclaimer, I don't think that Reylo is going to be all that good, but I do think that we're going to see a ton of Reylo. So I didn't feel that I could do this episode without actually speaking to a Reylo deck, right? So let's just go right into it. I mean, this deck a lot builds itself, right? Because they've tried to help us do that, which is perfectly fine. Actually, it's encouraged. I really like it with this kind of like tier 2 deck to kind of have it mostly built is a really good starting entry point. So we've got 15-point Rey Elite, 15-point Kylo Elite, Temporary Truce you have to play, and then Snoke's Throne Room, of course, that's just more thematic with them. It does work with both of them if you can keep them alive. Again, remember the main weakness of this deck is that once one of them goes down, the whole deck falls apart. So for upgrades, I've got 2 cross guards. I have 1 Dagger of Mortis, 1 Heirloom. Remember, it redeploys while it's on blue, so it's just constant redeploy here. Dagger is always a redeploy. Heirloom's blue only, but effectively always good. I did include 2 copies of the Jedi lightsaber and 2 copies of the Recovered Sith. I know that neither one of them triggers their extra ability because we don't have a Jedi, nor do we have a Sith, but they're still 2 cost ramp sabers, right? So they'll help you get down. I do have 1 copy of Rey lightsaber. I mean, in this case, you're dropping it on Rey for 2 shields. That seems pretty good. You're usually overwriting, get into it anyway. You kind of play it like a mono blue hero deck. And to be clear, that's kind of how I've structured this deck, is really you're just like a mono blue hero deck trying to throw in a bunch of the blue villain advantage cards. And then, of course, finishing with Treasured Lightsaber, just another 2-drop that helps you pull a card and ramp. For support, I have 2 copies of Binds All Things, and I do have 2 copies of Force Connection. I don't think you need 2 copies in play, but I think getting one early could really turn the tables in your favor. So I have 2 copies of that. So 2 Binds, 2 Force Connections for the support package. Then for events, I'm running Forsaken just because it's a good blue card. I do think in this deck, I know again, so you're loading somebody up, you're rolling out, and you're probably going to have a bunch of dice in your pool. But I think you're going to end up with a lot of stranded dice in this deck. So I don't think Forsaken's going to be as dead of a card as it would potentially be in other decks that are similar to this. I have 2 copies of Hidden Motive, 1 copy of Intimidate just for shield hate, 2 copies of Isolation. You're always going to be able to spot a blue, so that card's always on. I do have 2 copies of Lothwolf Bond, so it is exceedingly important. Like it's not just the speed here, right? But you can put a shield on each one of your characters. And do note that with Rey's power action, you want shields, right? You want some shield to be able to move and start flinging shields around. I mean, actually with both of their power actions, but Rey kind of gets it started. So you definitely want the shield to move, and that's when things can start getting interesting. 2 copies of Pacify. You're probably going to end up using that on your own dice, right? As kind of like a bad caution. But if you get a bad stuff out, remember these guys only have 2 damage sides. Now, 2 damage sides in the special that you potentially want, but they only have 2 damage sides. So I can see using Pacify on your own die probably pretty effectively. Plus, it helps you get those shields. 2 copies of Polarity. This is clearly the Rey Kylo card. Got to include it. And I have 2 copies of Forces with Me, so this only removes guns and indirect, but I found this to be a very useful card. You could also, if you want, put in like a Mislead, something like that. Do remember that we're limited to only blue cards here. We can't play gray cards, so it makes you lose a little bit of your other flexibility that you might run. But I don't know, again, this is a pretty vanilla deck with these guys, but I don't really know where else there is to go with them. I mean, they kind of do what they do, and you kind of just try and meld the best of both sides. There's probably a card or two that I'm forgetting, so if I am, let me know in the comments. But I don't know, a pretty vanilla deck list. So I definitely think you're going to see a lot of Reylo, so get used to playing it. Go ahead and give it a shot. It looks like a lot of fun, even if it's not very good. All right, so the last deck list I want to go through today is Han Biggs Falcon, right? So I realize that this is not even a new deck for Convergence meta. It's been around since the Across the Galaxy meta. However, with the spoil of, or now the release of Jump to Lightspeed, which is the new hyperspace jump as long as you have a vehicle out, this deck's looking real good. Now, the disclaimer, of course, of the new card, I'm forgetting that's right. Everything's brand new. Let me get to it. Desperate Measures, is the villain card that lets you, it's the 0 cost villain card that lets you just chuck an upgrade. I do realize this deck is pretty vulnerable to that, but I do think that you're going to see a lot of people playing this deck because this was a very popular deck. It has been for a while, and now that it has the ability to literally hit and run, for lack of a better term, with the Jump to Lightspeed, I do think that this deck's going to be flying around the early meta. So, there's a lot of guys, the Dice of Failure guys, have a lot more experience with this than I do, so I'm sure that they'll think this is a Bush League deck list, but that's okay. They can counter me on their next episode. So let's go start at the top. So I have Elite Han Solo for 15, Elite Biggs for 12, Armored Reinforcements, and then we're playing Mean Streets, of course. Mean Streets, just because you're so fast, if you can get your battlefield, you can start playing some removal events as you claim. So for upgrades, I have 2 hand cannons, 2 TLTs, and 2 dorsals. So the hand cannons just to put a little extra threat out there in case your Falcon goes down. The TLTs and the dorsals, obviously, for the Falcon. For supports, we're of course running the Legacy's Falcon, no surprise there. I am running 1 copy of N1. I could see running 2 copies if you really wanted to. I think 1's probably all you need. And then 2 copies of Suppressive Fire just for removal. So for events, I have 1 copy of Drop In, 2 copies of Easy Pickings, 1 copy of Across the Galaxy. That's to switch your battlefield in case you don't win your battlefield, because you do want it for Drop In, as well as just the fact that you want to be able to Mean Streets into some of the other stuff that I have below. I have 2 copies of Instigate for your ambush, or ambush activation, right? So to remember that you can, if you do it right, you can instigate Biggs to roll in the Falcon, to activate Han, roll them all in with ambush. It's not bad. 2 copies of Truce, that's to help you get that extra $1 you need in case you're unlucky. 2 copies of Jump to Lightspeed, 2 Indifference. You'd have to spot Han on that, but it's just too good of a card not to include. Most people are going to be going for Biggs first anyway. He's the right target. 2 copies of Attack Run. So this is a 0 cost from Legacies. I think a lot of people forget about this card in this deck. It lets you activate a vehicle with ambush. So on the Falcon, you can activate the Falcon, bring in one of your characters. This is usually late game once you've already lost Biggs, of course. So it's usually the Falcon and Han, but you're rolling in there with probably 4 or 5 dice. So that's not a bad deal. I then have 2 copies of Aggressive Negotiations. This is purely just a Mean Streets claim play. Just put the pressure on. They can either remove or you can deal extra damage. 1 copy of Snuff Out. That's just a pure Mean Streets removal play. You're probably not playing that otherwise. It's just on the Mean Streets claim. 2 copies of Field Medic, and then the call, just because I only had enough room, was I'm only playing 1 copy of Scruffy. I do think, and I've been pretty vocal, I think that if you're playing Yellow Hero, you want to play 2 copies of Scruffy, so I might see where else I can play this. I do have a lot of ambush cards here, but again, I want to make sure that I have the ability to get them. I think I have 5 of them between Jump In, Instigate, and then 2 copies of Attack Run. So maybe dropping an Attack Run and getting an extra Scruffy, maybe that's the better way to go. But so again, there's a couple versions, and I mean the reality of this deck is within a certain amount of cards, the deck doesn't even need to be all that tuned for a good pilot, because you're just going to you're not even going to see half your deck to maybe a third of your deck if you're playing this deck right. It's just fast. You're not going to get a bunch of the cards. So that's why I'm playing a lot of copies of certain cards that you would normally maybe only go 1 of. Again, playing the 5 ambush, I just want to make sure I have an ambush because that's the way to go. So. So again, this deck has some weaknesses, of course, with the new card that's been printed, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see this deck flying around early meta because people just want to play with the new Jump to Light Speed toy. All right, guys, so that's it. Those are my 5 deck lists for the early meta. Viewer question, what are you guys looking forward to playing? I'm really excited about seeing what people can put together. These are the decks where my head went first, especially that IG8 Hask deck. That's something I'm very excited to play. I'm also excited to just play out my boy Django, right? So let me know what you guys are excited about. If you like this type of video, and if you like what we continue to do on the Commando, make sure you're subscribing, give the video a like, and if nothing else, go Commando.